I'll like to start by introducing myself. I'm Riyanat. I go by Ri. I am an engineering team lead at Turntable. And I'm going to be hosting today, basically. We've got 4 panelists. We have Leanna with us, we have Anna, we have Laura, and we have Daniela, all coming with a wealth of experience in tech, in their current roles, but I'd love for them to start by introducing themselves. So let's just have a round table in no particular order. I'll just go with Anna first.
Sorry, is it me?
Yes.
Sorry, yeah. Well, hello, everyone. I work as principal engineer in test at Anaplan. I mainly help teams with their test automation journey and, so designing tools and best practices. Started my career as a Java developer and then moved into test automation a few years back. My experience in tech has been like about 20 years and really keen on DevOps and help drive teams' technical and cultural side. Yeah, just lovely to meet you all.
Fantastic. Thanks for the intro. Is it all right if I also mention that you gave a talk at DevOps this year?
I did. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's part of this role.
Fantastic. Really looking to hear more from you. Laura, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hello, my name is Laura. I'm a principal engineer for data at Kooth PLC, which is a digital mental health product. So yeah, that means that I'm not a data engineer exactly, but I'm technically responsible for the strategy for data across the organization, which includes technology in terms of engineering, machine learning and data science, and supporting analytics functions as well. My role is mostly strategy, coordination, enabling, that kind of thing, but more about that later, I guess. So my background is as a full stack engineer. I started working in tech 10 years ago, and I sort of slowly started to specialize in various aspects of data-driven development and products that are powered by data, really.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. Just admit someone at the same time. Leanna, would you like to go?
Hello, my name is Shittu, and I work as a principal engineer at the Lego Group. And I only joined the Lego Group in November, so I'm still pretty new to how Lego works. And given there are people who worked at the organization for like 20, 30 years, I feel like I need to get through at least 1 year cycle before I can stop saying I'm new to the organization. And before this, I was working as a principal engineer at the Financial Times. So it was more of a transition from being a principal engineer with 50% of my time on engineering and tech strategy versus 50% of my time on people management to here in the Lego Group, where I only do tech strategy and like the tech leadership kind of stuff. I started my career as a test engineer and then moved on to being a QA engineer and then moved on to infrastructure and DevOps, kind of whatever we want to call those fields, but basically into site reliability and observability and stuff, and then moved on to working on front-end FT.com, mobile apps, and then now to marketing and channels technology, which is to do with how do we sell Lego products to lots and lots of kids. So that's what my role is at the moment.
Amazing. I can't wait for us to like drill into like the day-to-day roles of everything that you'll do. And finally, we have Daniela. Daniela, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, so my name is Daniela. I'm a vice president at Morgan Stanley, which I guess is the equivalent of principal engineer. I work on the Optimus Cyrus platform, which is a platform that is designed to optimize computations, most of the time financial, but not only financial ones. I have a Java background, although several years ago, I've decided to specialize on Scala, which is a JVM language. I even wrote a book on it to introduce Scala to beginners. And yeah, my day-to-day job involves designing products, have a look at the roadmap, but also, review code, advise junior people, mentoring them, and developing, a good team culture. That's me.
Amazing. Right, just admitting someone. So I'd like to start with just asking, and this is a complete open question to all of our panelists today, to tell us a bit more about your role. So we might have a mixed audience, some people who are already in the role as principal engineers, but also a lot we're just aspiring really to be principal engineers. And so the idea is that we just start with just getting to know a bit more about what your day-to-day looks like, a bit more about the principal engineering role. That would be great, and then we can explore that a bit more. So again, open question, whoever would like to go first, happy with that. But could you please tell us a bit more about what the role, the principal engineering role entails?
I can go first.
Yeah, I'll go for it.
I wasn't sure how we're doing this. Maybe we can use the raise the hand feature.
I was literally about to look for it and see where it is. So the raise the hand feature is on, it might either be on your screen by default, it's under reactions, and there's a raise hand. Otherwise, if your screen's not fully, if it's not on full screen, it would be under more, and then you've got reactions, and it's raise hands. But yes, Diana, please.
I think for me, so how my day looks like, I work closely with, so when I said marketing and channels technology, that is both serving to Lego.com as well as B2B partners and retailers like Tesco's, Amazon, and all of these. I work closely with the B2B side of teams. We've got another principal engineer who looks at the Lego.com side of things. And when I say work closely with B2B side of teams, that is still like 13 or 14 teams. And it's just practically not possible to work with all of these different teams. So what I do is I pick up on 2 or 3 initiatives where there is quite a lot of like strategic thinking that's needed in terms of how should the architecture look like? How does this fit into everything else that we're doing across the organization? So currently I have 2 initiatives where like one of them, a team is just created, and another, we don't even have a team, but there's a vision to create a team. So I've picked these 2 teams as to one, figure out how should this team composition even look like, and what are the kinds of tech that we would need, like what kind of people do we need to recruit for this? So that is one kind of thing. The other team where they're building an application that should span across 12 other teams. For me, it is understanding how does the tech choices that they make help or hinder all the other 12 to 13 teams. So it's that overarching knowledge about what happens across the other 12, 13 teams and how we can impact, like how architectural choices or the engineering choices that we make would impact these teams and stuff. So that is one aspect of my role. There are 2 more things that my day-to-day would have. The second one is that, so there are totally 13 principal engineers across an organization of close to 1,000 odd engineers, which means that we come together on a regular basis to actually figure out if there's common patterns or interesting themes that we can pick out across the organization and stuff. So that's where all of the principal engineers come together on a regular basis, talk about common pattern and be that glue across the organization. So that's how I would say being a glue is part of my job. And the third aspect is I'm part of a leadership team. And each of these leadership team has a vice president who's basically my manager. And then each of the vice president has a couple of delivery leads, a couple of principal engineers, and then there's an agile coach and a head of agile coach and a head of TPM, which is program management. So it's as this leadership team, we have an organization of around 200 people. So what are the common kind of problems that we're hearing from people from down the ground that we will have to work on? As an example, I sponsor a couple of things for this group, which is like mentoring across the marketing and channels technology, or how do we do rotations between teams. These are not really engineering problems, but I feel like they're still part of the bigger culture and stuff. So yeah, that's how my day looks like, supporting on these 3 different aspects.
That's amazing. And that's a lot. So in there, I heard a few things about architecture, about strategy, about people. So it's a nice mix of a role. So that's really interesting to hear. Anna, would you like to go and share a bit more about your role?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my day-to-day is kind of similar, but also different in a way that I tend to focus more on a culture side and bringing ideas together and, you know, encouraging community of practice and from the technical point of view, it's more of like, you know, like, for example, flaky tests have been a problem. So what can you do there, like in terms of you should maintain your test and test execution time and providing guidelines there that applies to multiple teams. I mean, the way I see it is I tend to wear different hats. Like, so it's like there is a test architect role element to provide tech solution. There is a product owner element with, you know, designing requirements and guiding these future requirements and enhancements teams can do besides their own day-to-day feature delivery work. So that vision. And then there is this advisory or enablement role where you connect one team to the other. So cross-pollination of knowledge sharing and, you know, bringing ideas. Okay, look, they are doing this, and do you want to be, because this will really help you get to this position. So it's very much like that enablement and advisory role. So yeah, that's what it entails for me.
Great. And Danielle, would you like to share?
Sure. So my day-to-day job is actually not anymore, unfortunately, developing single features, but rather having the view of the system in terms, also from a technical perspective point of view, internally and externally. Internally, how things should work. So I don't necessarily know every single detail, but I definitely know where to find the information that I look for, but also what kind of impact my system is going to have on the rest of the company, what other teams need, what are the things that could be problematic once we release our system. So it's more on the overall view rather than the single detail. Also, a big part of my job is mentoring and helping junior people in my team. So I need to make sure that my team is productive, and I need to make sure that, you know, we follow the good practices of coding, clean code, so that, you know, the project will be maintainable for a long time. So that's pretty much me.
I'm really keen to hear about some of the challenges that you all face in your role. But let's have a full round robin first. Laura, would you like to share?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of similarities with what everyone's described and what I do on a daily basis. I'd say I cover pretty much all of those aspects. Maintaining an engineering culture for data. So for me, that really means making sure that engineering, the product delivery teams measure their products, measure the features that they build, and connect up that data as it flows around the organization. So it's, again, very kind of glue, cross-cutting across different departments across an organization. So that's kind of on the delivery and development of software. I help teams extract principles and guidelines for some of the best ways to build sort of robust and safe data products, for example. So that's one element of what I do. At a higher level, I need to make sure that I understand very clearly what the business's vision and goals are, so that I can focus my time on making sure we have not just an engineering strategy, but a engineering and analytics strategy that will enable the company to meet those goals. And then, once we've sort of built a roadmap, I'll then kind of make sure that the teams can get going. I'll sort of act as a consultant across various different teams and projects that are happening to provide some architecture guidance, some sort of subject matter expertise in particular areas of the stack, for example. So it's sort of like flipping between the very highest level of the business objectives down to making sure the teams that are actually delivering have what they need to deliver to meet those goals.
Amazing. So before I stepped into the engineering team lead role that I'm doing at the moment, which is around managing engineers and doing a few other things in the business related to strategy, I was a senior software engineer. And one thing that I'm hearing that's really consistent across all of your roles is how you work across teams. It's not just about the team you manage, but it's about like the bigger picture of the business and the organization that you work with, and basically working with other principal engineers or people at the same level. So, and I believe someone from the audience submitted a question, so I can already see some differences in that senior software engineering role that I did, but could you just elaborate a bit more about like the differences in like the role that's like one level down from a principal engineer role? So how different is it to a senior software engineering role? We can just go around again. Go for it, Laura.
I mean, I think the key difference for me when moving from a senior or lead software engineer role to a principal role is not being embedded in a single delivery team or squad or whatever model you have every day. You're no longer an individual contributor who's sort of associated with one particular project at a time. You're someone who, because of the effort that's required in coordinating and sitting across multiple different teams and projects, you are probably going to be, you're not going to be sitting with a single team and committing code as regularly. So it's the sort of that transition from being an individual contributor to someone who's enabling things to get done rather than doing the getting things done.
Diana, I've got a question, again, around this area, but more specifically, you mentioned that you were also a principal engineer at the FT. Would you say that role was more similar to the role that you're doing? Is that very different?
I think it was different in terms of how I spent my time, where at the FT, I had people management responsibility. I was bound to 2 or 3 teams that I was like the most senior engineer in that team, but also kind of a manager supporting those teams on a day-to-day basis. So it was like 50% of the time is what I was spending on what does, and I was working with ft.com and the mobile apps team there. So it was 50% of the time thinking about where do we see ft.com and the mobile apps for the FT in a year's time. And how do we get there? What do we need right now? Like there was some parts of it where we were spending on that, but there was also a lot of tactical things of, we have these people having these kinds of problems today. How do I help them today with these problems? And very tactical things as well. And also there was the whole people management aspect of like you have to do your performance reviews and all of those kinds of things as well. I found it like you need to have 2 different contexts when you're doing these 2 pieces of work. And I often found like the context switching between doing the tactical thing versus the whole strategic long-term vision kind of work was took a lot of time and energy for the whole context switching, which is why I kind of decided, maybe I should step back from one of these and just do one kind of like thinking, which is where I moved to the Lego group, where here it's mostly only the tech leadership and there's no people management aspects involved in it. And I think the scale of it also was different, where in at the FT, it was 3 teams that I worked with closely and 1 or 2, like usually 1 initiative, because there's also the whole people management involved, where here I need to work with close to 15 teams, but then I have, and with 3 or 4 initiatives at a time, but then I don't have any of the people responsibility, which gives me a lot more time and bandwidth to just focus on. And everything is very similar. Like all the time I'm thinking about domain-driven design and where is the bounded context for a team. It's all similar kind of problems where, yeah, previously I felt like it was slightly 2 different contexts in which I was working in and stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. And again, this is to all of our panelists. Did anyone else feel similar challenges, like with stepping out of a role where you were involved in a lot of other things, or like stepping out of the senior engineering role into the principal engineering role? Was it very different? What are some of those challenges that you faced?
I can go.
Yeah.
So like principal engineer wise, I've done at 3 different companies, and the difference has been very much aimed at like what their company goals are and where can I be most impactful. So I design my own initiatives according to the problem areas I see. So like the first one was more to do with designing common set of frameworks and libraries. The second one in the second company was, they called it test architect, completely different name, similar. it's all same, but I realize it's the security team, that's where the bottleneck is. And so if I engage more with them and help in the adoption of tools, because they would just simply say no, like, this is not, we're not, just like it's not easy to convince someone, and that's very important aspect and very challenging for like the role I was playing, but that's where I was like able to influence, and it helped the things move forward. And here, I mean, like I said, it's more cultural and product ownership, or that sort of requirements, and design the future requirements. It's become like that in Anaplan, but yeah, so that's been.
So you mentioned something that's really interesting, and I think someone else also mentioned this before. So not doing some of the people management, but still having influence in the teams, that I feel must be really challenging. How do you do that? Yeah, go for it, Laura.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on that point as well, because that is, so if you don't have like official authority, i.e. you're not someone's manager, you're not a team manager, yet you're expected to influence and impact according to what the company needs the most. I think the learning curve for me it was often very frustrating when I first started the role, because maybe I grew into the role because I was starting to see, have some success in influencing where I felt that things were important. But when I first started doing that, it would be like, it felt like a fluke to me. I didn't understand why sometimes when I tried to influence and suggest, it worked, and other times it didn't. And I think over time I've learned about how to understand like what the spheres of influence are in an organization. So working out, how my role relates to other roles. So that's why I think it's important to, work with your peers, but also to work with the people who are in positions of authority as well, so that you can understand where and how to influence those. I mean, often it's individuals when you start to get into the sort of leadership areas of a company, like what do they care about, what makes them tick, what's going to serve their needs, and then to constantly balance like what these different individual leaders need against what the company needs, and then you can kind of like work out how to, where and how to best influence. But I think, yeah, when I first started the role, it was difficult and I didn't really know how to do that well, but I've sort of picked it up over time, just by trial and error, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anyone else has got any better suggestions for how to more like do that in a more structured way.
I don't have suggestions, but all I can say is that I still struggle with that. I mean, this thing of, what the value of your work is, and with constant focus shifting and like teams priority changes, and you wonder, that, I mean, I still face that. And because you no longer work closely with teams, it's like this acquiring trust from them as well, to open to you and include you in different decision making they're doing. And yeah. So yeah, I'm still looking for suggestions for that as well myself.
I think it's quite comforting to hear that, you know, it's consistent across the board, some of these challenges, totally. Danielle, would you like to share any of the challenges in your current role, or if anything that resonates, please do share. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, convincing people, it's an art, and it's a very difficult art. For me, the problem that I have, well, it's not a problem, it's something that I struggled a little bit at the beginning, was the temptation of going back to my senior software development role, like when you really want to do something and you just like, oh, I could just do it. No, that doesn't really work. So the idea of being able of delegating, but also trusting the people that you have delegated to, because otherwise it's just impossible. You cannot be every single role, and you need to delegate, and you need to trust your people, and just believe that they are going to do the right thing. And if they don't do the right thing, spend time with them and explaining why the things that they have done was not correct. So I do believe that, you know, this ability of communicating, either because we are convincing somebody that even if we don't have official authority, they should listen to what we're saying, and the ability of explaining why an idea or an execution might not be ideal is so important. I think it's the most important part of this position.
So communication is a big thing. Anna and Laura, I know you touched on trust as well, like building that trust, but like, how do you build that trust if you don't manage the people directly? So communication, trust, and a lot of engineering skills. Daniela, you mentioned something that I found so interesting, like being tempted and falling back to your old software engineering role, which is something that I've found, like I've been caught out doing myself. It's what I know how to be. I know how to be a software engineer. I know how to just, you know, code and do the day-to-day, but that's not what my role is, right? Can you tell us a bit more about that and how you resist that temptation?
Well, I resist it most of the time. But the way I try to work against it is by mentoring people. So I'm lucky enough that mentoring, teaching people is one of my big passions. So I'd rather spend half day with somebody explaining how I would have done it rather than just do it for them. Because at the end of the day, we also need to think about our work-life balance. And if I do all the work, then I would not have a life anymore. So I think it's important to realize that, the growth of the team is important, right? And it's important to spend time with your people to make sure that, you know, they know how to deal with situations, because you cannot always be there for them and they need to learn by themselves. So I try and mentor people as much as possible instead of just doing the thing by myself. I don't know if that's cheating or not. It is a little bit, but yeah, that's my answer.
It doesn't sound like cheating, but I don't know if it resonates for any of our other panelists. Does that resonate?
I think I do the same as well. And to add to it, the other thing that I often do is the feedback cycle. Like when you do something, I've noticed that moving from a senior engineer to a principal engineer kind of role, your feedback cycles are much more longer. And anytime you're getting your feedback much sooner, that means you're probably thinking more, oh, let me just solve this from a senior engineer's point of view. Let me solve it now, versus how do I solve it for the future kind of thing. So I've often used the feedback cycle as a way to see, as an indicator to see if I'm working on it more tactically, or if I'm thinking of, oh, how do I solve this so that no one comes back to me to solve this problem again. So yeah, I think it's worth recognizing that as a principal engineer, when you're working on different initiatives, it takes months, sometimes years, before you can actually see the impact of the work that you have put in. Whereas with like when you're an engineer, there's a lot more quicker feedback. You just deploy something and you see it working and you know that it's like you've done the right thing. So yeah, using feedback cycles would be a good way to make sure that you don't step back into being a senior engineer.
That's really, really interesting. Can we just explore that a little bit more, please? So, as an engineer, like feedback, you get feedback really quickly. You do your deployment, you see your build, it's green, happy days. If it's red, it's broken. Like you can look at the number of JIRAs you've done. It's so easy to get feedback and to measure the work that you've done. So now if you're saying that that's not the way you receive feedback and it takes a lot longer, from my perspective, like experiencing that, not in the principal engineering role, but like in a different role that's not a senior engineering role, I've often struggled with not getting that feedback instantly. Like how do you know the value that you're adding? If that makes sense. Go for it, Laura.
I mean, I think a good heuristic for this is seeing, okay, so if you've put some work in, you've helped the team develop some principles, you've set some kind of cultural, you've helped set the culture up, you've mentored people, you've worked with teams, you've enabled them. I think a really great test of like how that's going for you is if you go on a nice long holiday and you come back and everything's just kind of going along, or you kind of just have to sort of set yourself these like much longer checkpoints. So even if you want to do that like for yourself once every 3 months, right, it's sort of the same. You can use the same principle as personal development goals on like a quarterly or 6 monthly or yearly basis, right? But just sort of set them for your goals as a principle. If I said to myself this year I wanted to make sure that teams can deliver new data products within days as opposed to weeks, that's going to take a while. I'll do a bunch of work to enable that to happen, and then you reflect back on it 6 months later and just see it, whether that's been achieved or not. And if it's not, then you can kind of keep working or whatever. But it's about like just reminding yourself that these things take a bit longer, even if you have to do that with your calendar, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That's really good to know. Very, very good to know, because it's something that I've also heard like more people in senior roles say, that you don't get feedback as much, and you somehow have to find peace that you're adding value. I mean, you do see the value that you're adding, but sometimes, like you mentioned, mentoring being a key part of your role. Sometimes you might get a message from a mentee who would say, "Look, you've had a great impact in my career," and you see them succeeding, but it's not measurable in the same way that you would measure a particular task that you do. So part of you might just have to find peace in the role. But Laura, I really do like the idea of just going on a holiday and coming back to see how like everything looks. Is everything broken? Does the entire team depend on you to get things moving? So that's really, really interesting.
I mean, I get frequent shout out. There's the Slack channel group like praise, and we shout out like on just our team members or somebody else will take your name. So that sort of feedback is great as well.
That's good. So sorry, quick one. Someone just asked in the chat, my multitasking skills, I've got to admit, need work in progress. So someone just asked in the chat if you can ask questions to the audience. Yes, please, you can ask questions. There was the opportunity to submit questions beforehand, but if you didn't, please do feel free to drop something in the chat and we will go around and ask that as well. So Anna, you mentioned shout outs. But yeah, that's something that we currently do in my workplace as well. And it's quite nice when you get a shout out. You're like, oh, I don't even remember that I said that to this person. But it is nice. It does remind me as well that sometimes that, okay, yeah, doing something in the right direction. It's not engineering, but yeah, it's awesome. So this is a group of people who are aspiring to be principal engineers. So again, it might be obvious, but at the same time, it might not be. Why should people in this group consider stepping into a principal engineering role? Why do we need more principal engineering roles, or why do we need more women in principal engineering roles?
I think I can start then. So
yes,
being a principal engineer, VP, whatever we want to call it, at the end of the day, so many companies have different names, is the idea of not just looking at your fragment of code, having a better view of the system as a totality, how the business is impacted by your system, how different teams work together. So it's not just about coding. It's also about coding, because, you know, sometimes systems don't interact well between each other. So you still need the technical experience. But it gives you a much better overview of how the business works. It's not just about the single functionality. And to me, that's extremely interesting, because often, you know, as a developer, you might work on a feature, but you don't understand what that feature, how that feature is going to impact the entirety of the business. So for me, it's extremely interesting, because it gives you a perspective on the business that otherwise maybe has a general software engineer you would not have. And, you know, having different opinions matters. That's why diversity is very, very important, because we all see the world in a different way. So definitely diversity is a plus there.
Mm. Please, yes, go for it, Laura.
I think it's worth noting that, like, the principal engineer role probably isn't for everyone, which is also completely okay, because but I think it is, who it is for people who maybe they're not satisfied with the level of, like, impact and influence they have in their role as a software engineer, or maybe you're, I mean, I don't advocate this as a kind of a route to career development, but for me, what drove me to the principal engineer role was maybe a bit of frustration almost. Just sort of thinking, okay, I can only have, you know, as a software engineer, I'm, you know, I can do these set of tasks, I can have this influence here. But for me, I actually got a bit frustrated with the sort of, I wasn't enjoying the daily tasks of coding and committing and, you know, working through bugs and sorting out config. And what I noticed was that I was frustrated with those things and bored. And actually, if I had the opportunity to leave other people to do it, then I would. And the things that I ended up doing, I just sort of naturally migrated towards were things maybe the tech lead role initially, and then spending more time with product people, and then spending more time in longer conversations and longer meetings about how the project or feature interacted with other things in other teams. And I didn't realize at the time that that was a signal that I would probably be more suited to the principal engineer role, but now I realize that it probably was. And I know that not everyone feels that way, but I think if anyone in this group identifies with those feelings about their daily tasks as an engineer, then maybe the principal role is a good step.
Nice, thanks. Connecting to the big picture is an interesting one for me, because on one side I like the low levels, and on the other side I like the big picture as well. And I wanted to ask a follow-up question just on what you've said, that is it okay that people might fluctuate and go from like a senior software developer role, like I just want to be hands-on for like 2 years, but now I want to connect with the big picture, and now I would like to step into a principal engineer role, but then to go back, I've not really seen that happen for a lot of people. I do have a mentor who has said that they've done that, and that works for them, and currently they're back doing hands-on, but they do like to fluctuate. Is that also something that should be normalized more?
I think so. I mean, sorry, I should have raised my hand,
yeah.
But no, definitely, because that is going to give you an experience. Sometimes I feel that, you know, there are so many departments, like there is supportability, there is observability, there's loads of sections in your company, and you want to have a feel of these different areas and to understand the problems better as well. So a junior person kind of shadowing you and seeing what you do is going to, you know, really get the insightful. And also I feel that, you know, yeah, I mean, in general, I think that's a very good idea. I was just going to say another point, which will come back to me, but yeah, if someone else wants to take over at this point, that's fine.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I was gonna mention that from a career perspective, most people find themselves asking the what next question. And Laura, I did find it interesting that you said, you know, it's not for everyone, and it should be okay that it's not for everyone. But from a career perspective, we're all asking, well, what's next? Oh, I'm this now. So what's next? And when I got to a point, I was like, well, what's next? Okay, there's principal engineer, there's solutions architect, there are all these roles. And if you don't step into those roles, it's sort of, from a career perspective, it's like you're staying stagnant, right? And I just find that very interesting that you mentioned, hey, it's okay, it's not for everyone. But for those people who it is for, it's important that you realize that, hey, if this is something you want to try out or you naturally gravitate towards that, then definitely go for it. So that's really interesting. So while we're on the topic of career progression, again, our audience, aspiring principal engineers, how did you progress? Please do feel free to share stories from your own experience. But how did you progress from that senior engineering role to the principal engineer role? What are the things that you did to level up?
I can go first. I think for me, it was a very natural transition, as in I started doing more of those kind of activities that involved not just my product team, but a wider, like, oh, how does this product work with these other products that we've got? And like started looking at the wider picture of how do we get these? And also I started getting more involved with like, the whole department-wide kind of problems, like, oh, we have this, like, I think one of the discussions I had with my senior director at that point was, oh, we don't have everyone across our organization using GitHub. Very, like, for me, and my team using GitHub on a day-to-day basis, that was like a very straightforward, like, oh, we just need to educate these people and maybe find use cases where they can use it. And then like I started getting involved with these kind of activities that are wider than just my product team. So it was natural, like I think I naturally moved into a more principal engineer kind of role where I started finding like senior engineers in my team who could actually step up to being the tech lead for the initiatives that was happening within my team, which gave me a lot more bandwidth to think about, oh, what does my whole organization need rather than just my team, and then started working on those initiatives. And like that's how I kind of moved to being a principal engineer. But there's like, when I was doing this transition, I remember there was another engineer in my team who also wanted to be a principal engineer, but a very different style of principal engineer, where I was more of like, I would like to solve the organization-wide problems, where he wanted to solve harder problem, but within a product team's context, which is where I think the whole specialist engineer versus more tech leadership kind of thing comes in. And I think an organization needs both of these kinds of people, but then it's just you're in the best place to decide which is the best for you, and if your organization needs those two kind of rules and stuff. So yeah, I think for me it was very organic, but it can be harder if your organization does not have the kind of principal engineer that you would like to be.
That's really interesting that you mentioned specializing. I'm not sure if you got to see the question in the chat, but that's exactly along those lines. I do think there's value in specializing in certain areas as you get to these very senior roles. And it sounds like you just touched on that basically, that there are different types of principal engineer roles. And for some people, specializing and focusing on very complex problems or on just a very focused area can also be a principal engineering role. So I hope that answers the question, Sammy, but please do feel free to ask follow-up questions. Would anyone else like to share? Go for it, Anna.
Yeah, just something to add on. Like for me, it wasn't like organically grown. I think I had to make myself more visible. I had to the sense, start going to various meetups, and started doing various courses. And then doing more presentations. Like this year, I did my first conference talk. So things like that to just make yourself more visible in the company and the solutions you're providing, so that they just don't sit on, within your team remit. You have to go beyond and share your ideas. And that sort of thing helped. The other thing that helped was like having a list of skills and things you need, kind of asking for that, like what is the difference between this and that, because every company has different ideas on this, what the role means. And some are common, of course, but there is like specific things. So I got that listed, and that helped, like, okay, you're already doing tick, 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 you know, that sort of a thing.
Yeah, I'd like to just follow up on that, if that's okay, because I actually initially found that moving beyond senior or lead engineer was very inaccessible, because, I mean, we've probably all experienced how there isn't really a standardized set of career paths in tech. Different companies have different names for different things. Even within the same company, you'll have people who are doing quite different things with the same job title. And I found that very inaccessible. And I did find within my company that when I asked, okay, what's next, just never really got a very satisfactory answer. So, however, like a couple of things that I did I'd say that one main thing that I did really focus on in order to level up, and I had to work quite hard on this, was making sure that everything I did could be defined in terms of value and impact at the company level, at the sort of organizational level. So every single time I sat down and I, you know, opened my laptop, I'd be like, right, what are you doing right now? Like, and is this going to contribute to this, to the goal of the company that you've determined that you can impact? And like quite often that wasn't very fun, because I'd be like, oh no, actually maybe I just enjoy doing this thing over here, or somebody slacked me and maybe I can get involved with that because it sounds cool. But you kind of have to really think, like, how am I going to demonstrate that I'm having a significant impact and I'm really moving the dial on this goal? So you've got to be quite disciplined and just really think about that all the time when you first start.
So if I can add my 2 cents, I totally agree. It's not just about having an impact, but also making sure that the other people know. So sending emails, talking to people, reminding, you know, of all the work that you are doing is so important. So many times I've seen amazing people doing amazing work and then not tell anybody about it. And I think, you know, that is definitely important, not just to have an impact, but also measure it so that you can tell other people, look, I've made this much impact, because otherwise, you know, the competition is out there, right? And as females, sometimes we're not always taken seriously. So being able to measure the impact, being able to, you know, confidently sending an email to 900 people saying, hey, we have developed this feature now is going to make your life much, much better, is so important.
That's an amazing point to touch on, because I think a lot of us struggle with that sometimes, just sharing what we've done. I know that I most certainly struggle with sharing what I've done. I just move on to the next thing. I'm like, challenge done, moving on to the next challenge. Let's do that. And I was always a believer, no longer, but always a believer of my work will speak for itself. No, you have to speak about your work. Yes, your work will speak for itself to a degree, but you also have to speak about the work that you've done. It's really challenging. I don't know how the audience feel about that, but it sounds like you have to be visible somehow, and that might involve you saying something or sharing your work. And that doesn't mean that you're bragging at all. It just means that you're basically communicating what has been done. So yeah, if there are any tips on how to do that, please do feel free to share. We do have a question in the chat. Andrea has asked, how do you keep up to date with technology as a principal engineer to be able to advise on design and architectural decisions? It's really, really cool. How do you do that?
Okay.
I'd love to know, because I really struggle with this one.
So my trick is that I ask questions, even the silly ones. And then after I get the answers, I Google. And maybe, you know, after work, I do some more research. So I think asking questions, oh, I've never heard of this technology. Can you give me a quick overview of what it does? Or, oh, but have we done, you know, proof of concept, or is anybody using it? It's very, very important to ask the silly questions. It's also important to ask the important questions, but the silly ones are particularly important. How do you
How do you get comfortable with asking the the questions that you think are silly, because they might not be, but like, how do you get comfortable with just asking those really simple, basic questions?
I just need that I need to ask them, and I struggle, but I do
Good.
ask them. So, you know, it's just a growth point, right? If you don't ask the question, then you're never gonna learn about things. So yes, it can be embarrassing to ask, "Oh, what is this technology that you're talking about? I've never heard of it." But the alternative is to just stay silent and do nothing about it. So I laugh and I ask the silly question by saying, "Hey, I'm about to ask a silly question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway." But that's my style. It's not probably for everybody.
Nice, thank you for sharing. Laura.
I mean, I think it's important as leaders. I mean, you know, in this role, you're a leader whether you like it or not, you know, and you're leading by example. And I think part of being a principal engineer is setting a culture where other people can learn and grow, which includes yourself. And I think so that's one element to it, by asking questions, by signaling that you're curious and open, and that you're not on some sort of ivory tower where you know everything, because that's simply not possible when you're in a role that doesn't involve day-to-day use of technology in the most hands-on way. You're setting up an environment that works better for everyone. It means that everyone can ask those kinds of questions. But I think there's also an element of just letting people know what it means to do your role. So, you know, say as a principal engineer, you know, I'll be working with you on your team, I'll be working with these other teams as well. Here's what I can provide guidance on, and here's what I'd like you to do for me. Like, I'd love it if, you know, here's what I'm interested in. If you do any work in this area, how about you let me know? Or why don't we ask people to do a presentation or a knowledge share if they mention something that you don't know a lot about, but you think, hey, I'd love to hear more about this. But you can kind of sort of say, well, I think it'd be really valuable for the whole team to know more about it, right? I mean, I always make the assumption that if I don't know something, chances are 10, 20, 100 other people won't know that either. And I think that's a very solid kind of, like, that's never let me down. Like, there's never really a world in which everyone else knows something and you don't. Like, that's just not going to happen. So yeah, I think that gives me some sort of comfort.
Yeah. That's really good. So really just be bold and ask these questions, do knowledge shares. I love knowledge shares. They really do help. Brown bag sessions and things like that, where people just share what they're working on, really, really good for gaining information. And I think someone mentioned, like, just going off to do some research, like after work, Googling. Danielle, I think that was you, just ask the question and then find out more later. So that's really cool to hear. Andrea, I hope that answered bits of your question. Just looking at the time as we're coming up to almost the end of the session, it's been really, really informative. So really do appreciate your time. To our panelists and to the audience who've been asking questions as well. We had someone submit a question around the challenges you faced, which I think we've covered mainly, but another question around mentorship. And I'd like to ask, like, how important did you find mentorship in your career progression and in your current roles as principal engineers? Go for it, Anu.
Yeah, so I didn't have a mentor, and this is something I've realized now, that the importance of it. So like, when you don't know, like, you know, someone just asked about the advice on, if you don't know something, how do you, so mentor can help you connect dots. It can help you boost your self-confidence. My mentor is here in this meetup right now. So that just helps, you know, I mean, so, yeah, I mean, that value and all those feelings you're having during this journey of principal, they can guide you, and they say, I mean, so yeah, it's been immense value to me so far.
Diana, thank you for sharing, Anu. Diana, you were about to raise your hand as well. Please do share.
So I think I've had mentors for a few years now, and they've ranged from mentors within the organization itself who are helping me with specific things of what happens within the organization. But I've also had mentors who've been outside the organization who ask me those hard questions of, what do you want to do in a year's time? Or like, do you want to be a CTO one day? Those kind of questions, which you would never, like the first time I heard this from one of my mentors, I was like, what? I can't even repeat what you just said. Like, that is like, my mind is so blocked to how I'm currently working. I can't think of that much farther down the line. So I think mentors are quite helpful in that way to ask those hard questions. And like, because of the work we do, where we don't get feedback on a day-to-day kind of basis, they help you validate that, like, that you're adding value to the organization, and like have that kind of conversation about what are the challenges that you're facing and stuff. The other thing which I found quite useful is having a sponsor, not just a mentor, but who is that person who will show you or like point you to the next step in your career. And like, what I've seen often is women have a lot of mentors, but very few people who actually sponsor. And that is something to actually think about. Like, yes, it's good to get advice and feedback from your mentors, but who's that person who's going to tell you, oh, this is a conference that you should do tomorrow because you're really good at it, like, and open those doors for you. So making sure you have some mentors, but also have some sponsors who will give you that next leap into whatever you want to progress in your career and stuff. So yeah, I think there's both that we should be thinking about, and finding both mentors as well as sponsors when you're thinking about mentors, sponsors and stuff.
I just wanted to add a quick thing about, I mean, I work in a really small organization, and I didn't unfortunately have any mentorship or sponsorship in the role. And I think, you know, with kind of progressing during the pandemic as well, I just didn't know where to look or who to ask, and I didn't have any contact with anyone outside my organization either. And it was really a struggle at times, because I often felt like very isolated. I'd moved out of the teams that I was working in, and I hadn't moved into another team or another supportive environment. So yeah, I would say, please, yeah, go and find some if you can, because it can be a bit of a lonely journey without that.
If I can add something, sorry, it's extremely important to get an external mentor to your company. You have no idea how important it is, because your internal mentor, of course, wants you to stay, but sometimes what you actually need to hear is, maybe it's time to move on. And an internal mentor will never tell you that. So having an external mentor, it's extremely useful for those situations, but also somebody that knows nothing about the company. So he can identify, or she can identify, the right questions to ask. That maybe, you know, somebody that is too involved in the company might miss them. Like, what is this relationship between these two teams? But why are these people talking about this? So having an external mentor, it's even more important than having one internally to the company.
That's amazing. And that literally brings me to my final question. How does one find a mentor? Do you have any resources or any ideas that you can share in terms of how to find that mentor? Yes, please. Yeah, Leanna.
So a good way to find mentors, or like the ones that I've trialed at least, is one is if you speak at conferences, or if you know someone who speaks at conferences, ask them. They will have lots of names that they will like point you to, saying, oh, you're doing this thing. This other person I've met here is really good at it. And that's how I found a mentor and a buddy, which I think is quite handy. And I think it's, I can't remember the exact, I can ping later. There's a all staff plus engineer kind of Slack channel that is there, which anyone could sign up to, and you can find mentors there as well, which I found quite, like, I've heard a couple of my friends use it, and they said, oh, it was good to actually find, especially during pandemic, where they were not having conferences, or they were not meeting people in person. This was like a nice place to find people and stuff. I can't remember the exact name. I can ping it later. But yeah,
Yes,
there are
please.
forums where you could look for people who are interested in mentoring, and a lot of people, like even me, like I would really like to help people because someone has really helped me, and it's like, if you can open someone's door, why not? So a lot of people would be interested. It's just that the first step is you need to ask. So it's okay. Like, and I'm an introvert, so I'm not someone who would just walk up to people and to speak. I need to think about it for 10 days before I can ask. But feel free to, like, if you can get over that initial hurdle of, oh, how do I ask? Just ask people, and a lot of people would be interested in mentoring.
Thank you so much. So basically just being bold, asking, joining forums, connecting, use your network basically. You mentioned if you know someone who speaks at conferences as well, and they would know people. So yes, it is challenging. And like you said, like for the introverts in the audience or in the room who might not feel comfortable just asking, but finding that, I suppose, finding that confidence and finding that courage to just ask basically. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with all of you, Laura, Anu, Leanna, Daniela. It's been fantastic having you for an hour today. And to everyone who's joined, who's asked questions, who's just listened as well, it's been absolutely fantastic. I know that I've taken quite a few points away. So thank you all so much. Solange just said in the chat, thank you all so much for taking the time to share your experience and advice. And there are lots of thanks in the chat. So thank you so much. I hope you have many more of these events to come and see you all around. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.